Good evening. You're listening to the Xtreme Movie Show. I'm your host, Rob. Tonight's episode, Xtreme TV, Season 2, Episode 1, Twin Peaks, the original ABC TV show by Lynch and Frost. I have with me Professor Pixel, who's gone over this journey with me for the very first time, checking out Twin Peaks as a young millennial. So, Pixel, let me start off by saying that when we just got through covering Season 1, I mentioned to you that personally, after rewatching it, I was reminded by how much I really love the show and how without it, there would be probably no Lost, no X-Files, no Millennium, a lot of shows that were heavily inspired by this. And of course, a lot of this goes back to Kolchak, the Night Stalker from the 70s, which we're also reviewing on a separate stream. But for me, I got to sit there and say, I really like this episode. It's a double episode. It's like a movie length long. Starts off right with the cliffhanger that we're getting at every episode with Agent Cooper being shot, waking up in his room, kind of sort of on the floor. And it's a very long, drawn out scene with a lot of humor, which kind of threw me off guard. And maybe that was intentional that we ended season 1, episode 8 with Cooper being shot, with him not reading Audrey's note. And now we're sitting here with this long, drawn out scene that I guess it's supposed to be kind of funny and nerve-wracking because there's some dark stuff in here and some funny stuff. You get a lot of Twin Peaks in this episode, the ups, the downs, the weird stuff, a lot of character things in there. So let's just jump right in. This opening scene with Cooper, take it away.
Well, we actually want to talk about the opening first.
Yep.
Because we usually have this nice opening that goes through and we get scenery of the town and it ends, the music's nice, bright, but it doesn't end that way. It's longer because there are far more people in this episode than I think any episode of the last season.
Agreed.
Some
of the scenes are a little different, I think, too. If I recall correctly, I'd have to analyze it, but I agree with you. It seemed like it went a little longer.
It went a little longer, and then towards the end there, where it usually says, created by Mark Frost and David Lynch, it takes a dark turn, like goes down the river, and it's all dark and creepy, and the music, you can hear the tone shift. And then you're right. It starts with Cooper on the floor, blood on his shirt, and this old man comes in saying, "How you doing down there?" And
he's got his glass of warm milk. Yep.
Exactly. And Cooper doesn't just lay there. He actually, he does lay there, but he wakes up and he realizes his surroundings, and he's like, "Can you set that on the table and call me a doctor?" The old man puts it on the table, and then the phone is there. You can hear Deputy Andy saying, Agent Cooper, on the other end. Are you there?" And the old guy just picks it up and hangs it. He just goes ahead and puts it back, and he goes to Cooper and says, "I put back the phone for you."
Yeah, this scene takes like 10 minutes, it seems like, and it's so slow. He's there shot, and that's the point. This guy that weighs probably 80 pounds is probably about 6 foot tall, just complete rail. He just doesn't see it. He doesn't get it. And he comes back and forth like winking and doing a thumbs up thing with Cooper. And the best part, though, is when he makes Cooper sign the bill for it with the tip. I'm like, it took forever. Cooper's laying there on the floor, and he's signing with his left hand. It's like, oh, Jesus, come on, guys. Get on with it.
And it's so, it feels almost cruel. The guy comes back at least 3 times, and 2 of them he says, "I've heard about you."
Yep.
And whenever Cooper's just giving the thumbs up back, I'm just like, what are you doing? But then
that's
again,
not what we want to talk about.
Yes, the scene itself changes once again. A figure after a while, stands over Cooper, and it's this tall, lanky guy. He has kind of a gaunt face, and he's saying that he's going to tell Cooper 3 things so that he can trust him. The guy wants Cooper to think of him as a friend. The 3 things are: there's a man and a smiling bag. The owls are not what they seem. And without chemicals, he points. And then he asks Cooper for his ring. Cooper just holds out his hand, and the guy takes the ring off. And he says he'll give it back once these things have passed. I don't know what was happening at that moment, but the guy doesn't finish there. He's saying that we want to help you. And Cooper asks, who's we? He doesn't give an answer, and he just gives an indication that there's a clue at Leo's house, basically. And then the guy just disappears.
Yeah.
We went from 10 minutes of just laughing at this, so it's just a ridiculous situation, to the strangest situation.
Right. That's the beauty of it. I mean, it does shift on that, and you have to have that as a chain, tonal change. You go from Cooper being shot to right there where Cooper is, because we've talked about how each episode is basically taking place over the span of one day. So he's there shot. It's real early in the morning if you want to look at it that way, after midnight. So everything that's going to happen in this episode's this day, and you're being dealt with him. But here's the thing. I also look at it as, okay, this is the start of the full season of Twin Peaks back in like 1990-91 season on TV. And it always had a crap time slot, in my opinion, back in the day. But like I said, it was what everybody was talking about. And so it looked like they just really said, we're all in. And here we get, similarly to an earlier episode in season 1, where you have communication with the other side, for lack of a better term, and we'll just say spiritual, not necessarily religious here. We don't know what these clues mean, but he does seem to suffer this. And we didn't really talk too much about spiritual stuff because it didn't really come up a lot. But I think because of this giant that he has a vision of, it's something that we're going to have to maybe consider in the back of our minds going forward. I don't put too much more into it other than, yeah, okay, he's not going to die. Obviously, we got these clues, and who knows what the hell they are, and everything too. So obviously we'll see what happens with Leo, because he's not dead, even though we saw him get shot. And then some things get cleared up here in this episode with that. So after that, they kind of cut away to One-Eyed Jack's. And this is where we talked about how Audrey realized her father's coming in. He was quoting Shakespeare and all that. And he's trying to break in the new girl. And she's playing coy, trying not to let him in. And she puts a mask on and whatever. And we find out that Blackie's also under the influence of drugs, or requires her fix. And that'll take a little bit of a dark turn. She needs her heroin. But Audrey manages to not get caught, and that's its own angle. So this isn't going to go away, whatever. And that's real quick, but it goes back to Cooper here, where he's calling for Diane, and gives this little thing about being shot and everything else there too. But then you're right, the officers come, they get him to the hospital. And then again, they get kind of funny here. Okay, we know Cooper's going to come around, but he's been shot 3 times. We had a bulletproof vest on. And there's this neat little scene where he talks about how one of the bullets, the reason why he raises his bulletproof vest up was because he had like an itch. He was doing a tick check. And sure enough, there was a tick there, and the bullet like nicked the edge of the tick. And if you see it, it's kind of neat. And if you've never had a tick, they're disgusting, especially if they get on you or your pets or whatever. But obviously, this is where we're getting the big info dump, because Lucy comes in and talks about, oh, this is what happened, who's in the hospital, who's not. So it's a nice, easy way of obviously communicating this information to the viewer, especially over a summer break, which is what you would have way back in the day here. We, of course, see that Shelley's in there, and the interesting thing to me, though, when I think things started to turn a little bit dark here in this hospital scene, because we're here for a little while in the hospital, is Ronette Pulaski, the second girl that came out of that state she was in, starts kind of coming to, and she has like some kind of visions, and they're pretty dark. She's not like completely conscious, but she's stirring. So it's like, oh yes, let's not forget about the second girl that we haven't really paid too much attention to for all these episodes. So again, she's going to probably be more apparent too. But this little section, because we'll come back to it. What do you want to talk about out of this?
Out of this, I mean, it is what you said. There's not too much to dissect here, other than Audrey managing to not get caught was partially a stroke of luck because of Jerry coming in and saying, "Hey, we need to. We have a situation. We have something to deal with," and Ben tries to just brush it off, but Jerry's insistent, and he's like, "Oh, fine," and he goes, and then Audrey takes off the mask, and she's kind of relieved, and that's the last we're going to see of her for a while in this long episode. And you're right about Ronette, because once she stirs, I believe the vision is of her walking the tracks like we saw her again. I'm sorry, the first time. And I don't know. We only got to see her, I believe, 2 episodes of the last season, which seems insane considering how important she would be to the investigation. But I think after this is the more interesting scene and fits more into the tone shift that we've been talking about. Because we have Maddy, and she's staring at the carpet, and her aunt, Sarah, asks if she misses her mom.
Right.
Maddy doesn't answer. She's just telling her that she had the strangest dream last night about the rug at this angle. And Sarah, for a moment there, is like, was Laura in it? Was Laura in it? And then Leland comes in. His hair is a stark white, and he is singing this song, and he is just filled with joy. And Sarah actually gets up, but Maddy, as she's staring at the rug, suddenly she sees blood stains covering it, and she's starting to freak out. And as she's basically screaming at it, the blood stain disappears.
Yeah, to me, this is interesting for totally different reasons than what you're saying, because what you describe occurs. I look at it as Maddy being the cousin. She's getting potentially visions, and we know that Sarah kind of does too, because we heard about basically, okay, who killed Laura Palmer? Well, we know that they're looking for this one-armed man. We've seen the one-armed man. We also know that there's another person named Bob, who we know Sarah's had visions about too. He's that really, really evil-looking dude, wearing denim and everything with the long hair. He looks kind of like Native American, but just older or something. And that's something that may come into play. I don't know, but I just look and go, well, Maddy's here. She's going to have probably more to do with the fact that it's not just her and the James gang walking around investigating things. It's the fact that she's a blood relative. Maybe something that Sarah and Maddy, they have in common. Sarah's maybe not aware of it. Maybe Maddy is, being younger. Who knows? But then the irony of it is exactly what you said. She's staring at the rug, which is a very light colored carpet, but it's his hair, his rug that changes color. And I was like, so she sees a color change in the rug. He walks in and has a color change on his rug, on his scalp. And I disagree. I think he's delirious. I think he was grief-stricken before and dancing and all that over the top stuff, kind of like Sarah was too. Now his hair's turned white. He doesn't care. He feels like he's a new man. He's singing, I think it's Get Happy. It's an old song. A lot of old timers know that song. But you're right. He's got this verve. He's got this energy that he didn't have before, but it just seems like he's delirious and he's lost his mind, but he wants to go back to work. Yeah. He goes and he meets Ben and Jerry, at the plan, and he comes in and starts
For
singing, and and he's like, I'm back, we're going to they're like, oh, okay, whatever, and it's like, oh yeah, he's their attorney. I'd kind of forgotten what he did. But this is when it changes a little bit, because now they're going to Leo's home, and we see Cooper there, and he's of course been banged up, but he's functional, and they're looking around and stuff. But this scene I did not like and didn't care for, but we talked about the comedy relief. Andy, he's walking to the house, and he stands on a board, is a plank, and it comes loose and just bobs her right in the nose, like it's a Bugs Bunny cartoon. And for about 1 minute, he's just like wobbling back and forth and all that too. But he's kind of like unlucky lucky, because it made apparent that there is this cocaine stash that Leo apparently had underneath there, which is something they're looking for in a pair of boots. To me, I was like, oh God, we're going to just see more of this Andy lunacy going forward. And I don't dislike Andy, but Andy definitely gets some character growth in this episode. Yeah, I mean, he's not a bad dude. He's not, and people take after him. And he did shoot Jacques, so he's got some character growth going. What did you think?
No, he's still Deputy Dumbass. He's going to basically tell them that Albert is coming. And as he steps on this board and gets hit, he's just going back and forth. It's like a cartoon. But it does give them the chance to find the cocaine and the boots that was hidden, basically. And Albert tried to make fun of him for the board, but I believe it was Harry who said, I think you might be more right than you know, because then they pull out the boots. After this, though, we get to shift to the double R. Maddy and Donna meet at a booth, and apparently Donna asked for Dolores' glasses, and Maddy gives them, but something's definitely off about Maddy compared to where we saw her last.
Yeah.
The way she's speaking, she's just almost monotone in a way for a good minute there. She talks about how she hates her own glasses and breaks them, saying that she's never going to wear them again. And Donna is there smoking. But Donna basically tells Maddy, you got to keep your lips shut. Don't say anything to anyone. Just let James handle it. And we knew nothing. But then Norma comes over and gives Donna a note that was left for her that says, look into the Meals on Wheels. And we just to top off the scene, the love of your life, the log lady, is there. And she spits out her gum and takes a new piece while putting the other one off of the table and onto the wall.
She will not be denied. Yeah, obviously Laura was portrayed as a goody-goody when we found her in episode 1, season 1, and we find out really quickly that she had a dark side. But one of the good things that allegedly she was involved in was this Meals on Wheels program, and we don't know who left the letter here, so it's a little bit of another clue. We know that Cooper hasn't seen the letter that was left for him, so we'll see if that gets addressed in this episode coming up. But yeah, it's just more of the James and Donna not sure if they can trust Maddy, even though they use her, and Maddy wants to be a part of it. It's like, just get over it. Let Maddy be a part of it, for God's sakes. It's like, but she is acting a little different, but I don't know if this is a new way she wants to present herself, or something happened, or what. So I can't tell if this is a real big shift character-wise or what, because I didn't really honestly pay much attention to her. She was just very under the radar. And that's okay. Maybe obviously we're going to see more of her. I mean, I think that's pretty safe to say, especially with them doing it. It's not a very long scene here, but we get a situation here that cuts back again really quickly to where they're at Leo's place and all that. And we get where Albert, who's the real jerk guy that nobody likes, Miguel Ferrer's character. Just he's the guy that doesn't believe anything that's going on in Twin Peaks. So he's the person that if you don't like Twin Peaks and you watch the show, you're watching it through his eyes because he just is rolling his eyes, shaking his head. He's just being a real jerk, and he does it so good, which is the beauty of it. His performance in this show is just tremendous as well too. But he explains why he was brought back. He was ordered to go back to return. And he's talking about how Leo's basically saying that, you know what, hey, I found out that he was locked in his jail in his place in Montana, but that the date that it was, the Hungry Horse. But the reason why that's important is because he couldn't have been the person who actually killed the very first lady that got murdered. Because remember, Laura was not the first. Laura and Ronette were the second and third, or third and second, however you want to look at it. They were the next group of girls. The very first one was this one from like a year or so ago, or whatever, Teresa. And so, okay, so even though we're looking at Leo as the prime suspect here, and we know Jacques been wiped out, we still really don't know who killed her. But Leo's looking like the prime suspect, but something's obviously turning out to be where the evidence is kind of almost otherwise. And just to kind of rub that in a little bit, you get the one-armed man that we'd seen, the shoe salesman, coming in and basically says, hey, I'm here to see Sheriff Truman. He told me to come by because he wants to buy some shoes. So they go immediately tying those two things together in real quick short scenes here. Anything about these pop out to you?
No, it harkens back to the first episode that Albert appeared on, really, because Dale the entire time is allowing him to take to just go off on these people like he wants to, until the end, towards the end of the day, where he tells Albert, stop. And he says to Albert, if he wants to be involved in this investigation, he has to make peace with this town. That's the only way he'll do it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a lot of information that's just dumped. In fact, in the next scene, it's the tape with Sheriff Harry and James.
Yep.
And they're because they got it from Jacoby's office. James, of course, lies about how he got it. Oh, I was knocking, and the door was open.
Yeah.
They address the cocaine that was found in the on his bike, pretty much, last episode. And Harry knows that it isn't his. James says something peculiar here, though, that Laura would say that like this funny old rhyme. Do you like to play with fire? Do you like to play with Bob? And we know Bob, but I don't know, something about this feels really off. Which I know it's supposed to. Really off. Which
it's James that's off. I'm telling you, because he goes in there and look, they know who James is. They know he's really not the killer. They're pressing him to make sure too, but he's obviously embarrassed because Laura used him for drugs and everything else there too, even though they were together, but he couldn't satisfy her like a real man could, and that's why she liked fooling around, and we know she had this dark side, and he seems like really hurt by it. And I'm just going, you know what, you stole the really good looking guy, the Bobby's girlfriend Laura from Bobby, the quarterback, and here you are just acting like a punk, and so much so that Dawn, because she's going to the station house, she wants to go see him because he's being locked up for right now. She's the one that's basically has realized, no, I do love you. We love each other, and I'm okay with it. And I understand she died, and it's horrible, but and we've seen a lot of this. But we see James acting like a pud whacker here. He just is like a real I don't know what his deal is, because he's just the worst character. She tries to give him some smoochy kiss face, and he don't want nothing to do with it. And it's like, what is your deal, bro? I mean, I don't know.
More than that.
He's just such a wuss. I
Because
can't stand him.
when Donna comes by the station, she's wearing Laura's glasses, and
All right.
James notices her, and he's like, what did you do? And she's trying to act basically bad for him because in the last episode, or well, towards the last episode, he got a look at Maddy in the blonde wig, and he was kind of stunned because of how much she looks like Laura. And I think Donna is just trying to make herself more like Laura was for him.
Maybe
there's a key piece here that we missed during the interview scene. Dale enters, and he basically looks at James. He's like, I don't want you to avoid my question. I want you to just give me the other half of the necklace. And James does give it, and then he's taken back to the cell, and Harry asks, how do you know he have it? And Dale explains, well, I knew he was in love with Laura, but the Jacoby angle, I did not know. That is new information that I didn't have before. And so now he has a new lead. There's only one more scene before we get back to the serious stuff, and that's when Dale takes Lucy and Andy into the room, and he has a box of basically a ton of Flesh World magazines. Mm-hmm. And he says, I want you two to look through these and find any traces of this girl here. And Andy, once Dale's gone, he's like, well, Lucy, I don't know if I like being in this situation with you. It's kind of awkward. And Lucy's like, why? We're both professionals. She opens the magazine. Oh.
Yeah. Well, that's just our way to see them together as a couple now, because we're waiting for Lucy to come around. Yeah, we spend, like I say, a lot of time in certain places, and a big chunk of it is in the hospital, because the next scene is where you get Dr. Hayward, and he's obviously a busy fellow right now. He's checking out Dr. Jacoby, and Cooper's there, and he's got Truman with him. And again, it's another info dump. He's basically saying, hey, how'd you get the necklace? And he says, oh, I followed this red Corvette, which was supposed to be Leo's. He followed James and Donna. He says he saw them buried and went and he took it, which matches the end of, I think, episode maybe 1 of season 1 that we saw, because we don't know who had it. And that remained out there forever as a quick scene, a cliffhanger. And of course, he goes on to his theory about how she's like 2 different types of people or whatever. And she really kind of wanted to probably off herself in her own way, just because of whatever. And that's what he was trying to figure out, because he was attracted to her too in his own way. Let's just say it's a professional interest. We don't know anything else at this point too. But he was asking about how Jacques, when he died, and what it was like. And he said, well, it smelled like burning oil or something. So we'll see if that comes into play. But the doctor, which didn't have a lot of screen time except for that first episode, 1 or 2 scenes early on, obviously now we're seeing him again too. But the next couple scenes that come up in the hospital, I thought were pretty interesting to me, specifically one of them. But the next scene is you get Bobby, and he's going in, he's checking up on Shelley. And Shelley's a bad girl. I mean, all the guys get in trouble because they're going after girls that are like just right out of high school. And I don't know what to make of that, other than that seems a theme here. But he's got flowers. So Bobby, the quarterback that got cheated on from Laura, that James stole her on, and then he steals this one, whatever. They have their little conversation, they talk, and it's like, they do the I love yous and all that. It's kind of cool. I mean, okay, whatever. It's just seems like infatuation to me, or whatever, hot sex or whatever, because it doesn't seem like they've been together that long. But the real scene to me is we've given Nadine a lot of grief. And Ed's sitting down and he's talking the whole story with Cooper. And this is where Cooper's like, you can just, Kyle MacLachlan does such a great job of like portraying this guy as being sharp, little quirky, but also sensitive because he's listening to him. I mean, and he's vibing and feeling the story. And this is what makes this interesting where you don't go, oh, this guy's a bastard. You know, he's having an affair. He should die or anything. You get the backstory of how these two were together. And it was pretty neat. Basically, Norma and Ed were together for a couple years in high school, but then something happened. They argued and fought. Norma took off with the one dude, hadn't even slept with him. And so he realized Nadine was there. They ran off, half drunk, half crazy, got married. Then he was thinking about annulling it or whatever. But he says some nice things about her, like, you know, she was just so full of joy and she was a crack shot. We went shoot like pheasant hunting or something. And he said he shot her eye out. You're like, oh my God, this is absurd. But the way he delivers and the way he talks and the way he's in there with them, you realize he really does love her. But part of him feels like, you know, he wants to see what he could have had with his first love, who ran out on him. So it does seem like Nadine is really the nice one because, as he said, she never blamed me. She just was always whatever. And it's just kind of, it's really syrupy. It's really cheesy. It's really hokey. But damn it, he does such a good job with it. I just absolutely love it. I'm like, okay, this is really good. Because at first I didn't like her. Now I'm like, okay, I like them. Although I didn't like what she did to herself, you know, taking all the pills.
No, I don't like it.
What did you think about these scenes?
The funniest part is that while Ed's saying, and we were on our honeymoon, and then I shot her eye out. You what? And he starts explaining, oh, well, I was hunting, and I really enjoyed the shot in my hand. Jumped off a rock and hit her in the eye. And all the while, Albert is just like a little ways across the hall.
He can't believe it.
He's, like,
he's pulling out his hanky.
I'm sorry. And he's,
it's really good.
But the humorous moment doesn't last because Dale is walking away and he stops, and right down the hall in a room, he hears dripping. He turns. The body bag that I think was used for Jacques earlier, it's hanging up and it's open and it looks like a smile.
That's the first giant clue.
Yeah, and then the doctor goes to the nurse, and there is a theme going around because he's saying to speak to the kitchen. The food is disgusting. The food will kill you. Another important detail, though, because it shifts to Pete, who's trying to eat his meal, but he's like, and pushes it away. Pete's alive. The last we saw of him, he was going into a burning building, but he is alive.
I like Pete. He's like,
I like Pete too.
Yeah,
that's right. And the only other scene worth mentioning is Norma checks in on Shelley, saying, "I hope you're okay. I'll bring some real food later." And she sees Ed holding Nadine's hand before we're finally free of the hospital.
Yep, finally.
But this next scene is honestly one of my favorites.
Bobby having din with Dad. I liked it too a lot. Go ahead.
Because Bobby enters the double R, and his dad is right there at the table, and he's like, "Son, is that you?" And Bobby turns around, and his dad asks, "Hey, do you want to join me?" Bobby is like, "Okay," goes over, sits there. And they do the how was school? Good. How's work? Good. But then Bobby asks, "Dad, what do you do?" And the dad just answers, that's classified." Leads me to wonder, what the hell does he do? He's living in a small town,
military,
middle of nowhere, and he's Major, whatever the hell their last name is.
Briggs.
Major Briggs. I don't understand. But
Army bases in small towns. A lot of that stuff was, electricity or nuclear power. If you think of like Stranger Things, early on in the first season, when everyone didn't really know what it was about, and they had some of the scenes of the secret facility where of course a lot of things turn out to be, about the upside down, all that, which you find out later. It's a lot like that. You have these bases in faraway places that experiments happen and things. I'm not saying that's the case here. We don't know, but to your point, we had saw him briefly, and I like the way he had talked. I mentioned to you before because he has this very particular way of describing this vision, not dream, but vision. He's very particular about explaining the difference. But here's the thing I wanted to point out about this exchange he has with his son Bobby. We had kind of debated before, I think, at the funeral about Bobby, and I think we disagreed on what our approach to him, and I feel this justifies me saying I think Bobby's a legit good guy, even though he's kind of a quirk and he's running drugs. Despite those little things, he looks at his dad while his dad's telling this really. I love the fact this is a 2-hour episode because Major Briggs is in no rush. He's telling the story in perfect time tempo. You can tell he's got all the time he's allowed to take to say it. He has this vision about being in this grand house. Everything's perfect and whatever. And he's able to embrace his son and it's full of love. And he says, I just wanted to share that with you. His father in no way is manipulating him at all. He's being very open and honest in a very verbal, masculine way, not physical. And Bobby's looking at him with his eyes like, I can't believe what you're saying. But like we saw before, he starts crying. He's like, oh my God, he's like hurt. Like he wanted to hear that from his dad. And it's like an emotional release because when his dad leaves, he does break down. And I thought that was pretty cool because we don't know what turns these characters going to be. A lot of them seem to have a good side and a bad side. And that's where I kind of like this whole thing. So you're right. Major Briggs might have some more stuff going on later on. He seems like he's going to be another major character, if we want to say that. But this little scene with Bobby getting upset about that kind of goes away quickly.
I didn't take it as upset. I took it as that he was like truly touched by it. Because he's saying that.
Okay, yeah.
Because the dad's saying that he feels truly hopeful about Bobby and that his future, and he's not worried anymore. He like shakes his hand, and you can tell he's got that tight army grip.
A man's grip.
Yeah, it's such a nice exchange that I didn't expect. But you're right, it does shift.
It was. Because you get that flashback where Bobby realizes, because Hank's in there cooking, and he says something to the general on his way out or whatever, about the quality of the pie. And then that's where it was confusing when Leo got shot. We kind of thought Leo was dead, maybe not. We weren't sure. We were split on that, I think. But now we of course know that he's not. But we also see... Well, yeah, but here we see that, okay, this is when Bobby realizes, oh, it's this guy, Hank, that shot Leo. So what nice sentimental moment we had quickly went away.
Yeah. We get another information dump.
Yes.
The next scene, they're going over the details of the case, going over everything. And Dale and Albert, they're just going back and forth. And while this is happening, the music quickly does that. It drops in tone, and they do flashes because once they start talking, Dale takes a donut and pans down, and he goes to a red light, and then the train car and Ronette. But they end their conversation pretty much, well, if you can call it a conversation, on the fact that there's a third man. They don't know the third man. They don't know anything about him. But that's all they do. But I believe Andy starts getting upset while looking over the Flesh World pictures because there's a picture of Laura, the one that we've looked at the end credits every episode last season.
Yeah.
And Albert I'm trying to remember exactly what he says. I didn't mark it down. But I think he says that basically these kind of cases are tough
triple
to handle
or something. Yeah.
Yeah, something like that.
You got through a lot of them for crying. Yeah.
Then Andy stands up and tells him to shut up, and he just walks out, and Lucy's there like,
Was she getting a little wet? She getting a little excited watching her man, really tear things up, even though he's a goof.
Deputy dumbass.
You just shut your mouth.
Shut your mouth. Another thing I miss, I'm noted down. We miss Waldo. We do. That bird.
Yeah. Well, the scenes that you were talking about where they're doing the data dump and they're talking about how there's this third person. They also talk about how there's a real rare blood type. So it really doesn't look like Leo's it. It just doesn't. Even though he was their number one suspect for whatever, and he's involved in bad things. Of course, the irony is that you're getting this long pan and scan over all the donuts, which is like about 100 donuts stacked like 3 high all the way down, all these different kinds. And then they cut it. They're blending in some camera scenes as this goes in of the stoplight that we've talked about, where Cooper was whittling the steak in the first season. I think we saw it in another one. So that's just one of those images that they're replaying. So it's some pretty neat scenes here too. But the irony is that Albert, he's the only one that hates the coffee. Every time he takes a sip of it, he looks at it like it's disgusting or whatever. But doesn't ever say anything about it. But like I say, he's the anti-Twin Peaks guy here too. So it's kind of funny seeing him get picked on by the guy he thinks is a dog. But yeah, obviously, again, it's a long episode. It's a big data dump in certain sections, but it doesn't feel forced. Things get time that they need to get you sucked into the scene for it, because that's all the scene is here. Now we get a little bit of a different scene, because we had mentioned that, or you'd mentioned a moment ago, that we saw that Pete was in the hospital. He's alive, hating the food, but he's coming home. He's got head smoke inhalation. Harry brings him back to his house, and they have a little conversation. And looks like Josie had left a note, and he reads it, and they talk. And he says, yeah, every so often she goes to Seattle, comes back with a lot of clothes. And Harry tries to prepare him for the inevitable news that may come, that Catherine may be dead. He said, prepare for the worst, hope for the best, sort of thing. And then, of course, a new development. And really, it's one of the there hasn't been very many episodes where we have not gotten a new character. We get one here, even if it's a minor one, where the phone rings, Truman answers it, and the guy wants to talk to her. He says, I'm not here, who's calling? The dude hangs up, but it's this Asian guy, and he's at a bank, and it's like, okay, so we know Josie's involved. Who knows if it's the Triads or the Tongs or something, the Asian gang, or who knows. But this, again, has been my least favorite storyline of all. It's interesting and a little bit, and it's going somewhere, kinda, but now I'm kind of not into like Josie at all, and I'm starting to go, well, at least I understand what Catherine is, but we haven't seen her. So not much going on to me in this scene.
Well, actually, there's a key piece that we know Catherine isn't dead, because Catherine is the main reason why.
Oh, that's right. Yes,
Shelley's alive.
Yep. That's right. We just haven't seen her.
Shelley out. So I don't know why they're saying, well, we haven't found her body yet. The last we saw of her, she was escaping the mill with Shelley, and Shelley hasn't said, Catherine saved my life. She gave her life for me.
That's a good point.
So yep. I'm just confused as hell about that. You're right. The Asian man does call. He hangs up the phone. Then he puts in a call to Hong Kong. But quickly the scene shifts. We don't learn any more information about him. We're at the lodge with Ben and Jerry. They talk about food a lot. And they're just talking about, oh, yeah, that sounds delicious. And Ben asks Jerry if he had seen Audrey at all that day. So at least he noticed that she was missing. But then they walk into basically their office, and Hank is waiting there for them.
No, it's Patrick Swayze. Hank reminds me of Patrick Swayze. I don't know why. Just put it out there for the Twin Peaks universe. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. that threw me off there. Okay. But yes, Hank is there. He's waiting for them. They talk about Leo. He apparently has some brain damage, but he's in the hospital. Um, it doesn't sound like Hank knows that Bobby was there that night, because he says that
Right.
Leo was chopping wood because
Right.
he saw him with the axe. But I guess he didn't see Bobby there. And they basically work out the deal. And the way that Hank and Jerry interact, there's like this hostility there between them, while Ben is the cooler of the two, I suppose.
Well, Jerry thinks he's a tough guy. He's a little twerp. He's got that Napoleon complex going on, or whatever like that. And Hank looks like he would just snap him like a twig. Yeah. And so we definitely feel like there's something there, because the evil plan, according to Ben's, going swimmingly, because the way Hank makes it sound like that Catherine's was in there and is going to die too, and that she is dead. So they're assuming she is. They don't know that she is or she isn't. We technically haven't seen her, but we do, like I said, based on what you had described before with Shelley, that she is alive. We just haven't seen her this episode.
Yeah. We shift back finally to Audrey, as she's entering a room at One-Eyed Jack's. And Blackie's there waiting for her. She has like a girl in the back massaging her shoulders, and then another one at her feet. And Audrey's asking, so why was my room locked? And why is this fridge here? And she's talking about the large guard. And Blackie's asking, pretty much, why did you not let the owner have his way? And Audrey says that the owner just isn't her type. And Blackie asks, who is your type? And Audrey at that moment, she's saying, not you, no offense. And right after that, Blackie like drops face a moment, and she says, I don't want to hear another complaint from you. Got it? Audrey's gone in far too deep, and I think she's realizing it now.
Yeah, I gotta say that I like what Audrey's doing, going deep undercover. I always like it when there's that sleuthing going around. That satisfies the Hardy Boys instinct in me from a little kid. But I have to point this out, because I mentioned before how she's got this 1940s, 50s femme fatale thing going on, and I wasn't really crazy about her sexy outfit for her job. But in this scene here, it's changed. She's just wearing like this black slip, and it's a one-piece throw over, or that she's got the red pumps going on. Oh my God, she looks about 100 times better, and she did not look bad before, but she's just incredibly sexy. She is perfect in this dangerous woman kind of role, and it's just intoxicating to watch. It's such a fabulous performance, and visually it's quite stunning to me. It doesn't get old, and it doesn't look dated either. It looks like she'd be classy looking hot babe, and no matter what area you're in here too. And that's the whole thing too, is it's easy to sit there and say, oh, well, throw something on, let's be hot, let's be sexy, and that's good enough. But there's an attitude that goes with it, and she does a good job in the scene you're talking about with Blackie, where you see, because they're both in camera shot, where Audrey's like turning around, you can just see like a quick flash go across her face of like you can just see her thinking on her feet, even though she's not very emotionally outwardly expressive in her role. And I think that's something that just needed to be said, because obviously when you're in a whorehouse and you're dressed up all whorishly, for lack of a better term, even though it's a business, which she's being reminded of by Blackie, that you don't screw around literally with the house or the customers. We're going, okay, this remember, this is a dark element. She got herself into it. Let's see her get herself out. And that'll be important here, like after the next scene, because it's going to come back to her. We're going to get a little bit more time with her, but not really anything I think major going on in this scene, other than Blackie's reestablishing her authority, just making sure that Audrey knows what's up. But before they go any further with that, there's just a quick cutaway scene where you see Well, Norma, who runs the restaurant, was in charge of the Meals on Wheels, and like we said before, Laura was something that she was involved in. So Donna calls her to basically sit there and say, "Hey, I'd like to take over for it, for Laura's position, if that's okay with you." And Norma knew they were friends or whatever. She's like, "Okay," but it's like a quick 2-second scene or whatever. It's just to say, okay, Donna's actually doing something rather than trying to act like a bad girl for stupid head James. Back well, actually, before we even get onto this Audrey's next big scene, nothing really going on here. We get a very interesting scene at the Palmer household. You want to take that one?
Yeah, because the first episode of the first season, we are introduced to a character that's Donna's sister. She finally makes an appearance, and they're doing like this performance thing. There's this younger daughter we didn't know about at all, and there's no explanation as to where the hell she's been. And she's just starting to play the piano slowly, while the sister that we were introduced in the first episode of the last season and haven't seen since. They haven't acknowledged her existence since. Starts reading some poem about Laura. Blah, 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 blah. What the hell? This is like the one major drop-off that I feel. Because right after I don't remember how many times they had dinner inside Donna's household, and none of the girls were there except Donna and the mom and the dad and whoever they had over, like James. It just feels there's something like gnawing at me there.
It does stand out for being where you're going, okay, I don't know what's going on here. Yeah, I agree. It's not, wrong's not the right word for it, because you get this young girl, it's like preteen, maybe, and she's dressed up kind of weird. Yeah. And she's obviously skilled at dancing and piano and everything else too. And you're like, okay, I guess. Why is she here? I don't get it. I mean, it's an interesting scene.
No,
I don't know. I don't know if the scene's basically introducing these characters because they know they're going to do something with them here in season 2. I have to assume that's what it's going to be, because the only thing I got out was here you've got Gersten, which is an odd name. She's the one that's like I say, super talented playing the piano, and it's like a contrast of it's like a kid competition. Well, I got this one girl, Donna, who's older, but she's kind of boring, and we don't really pay attention. She's a good girl. And then we've got the one that never appears, that you're talking about, that is missing, that I had totally forgotten about. Now we've got Gersten, his preteen one, that's like their pride and joy, and the one that's probably the most spoiled because it's the youngest, because she's getting the piano lessons, the dance lessons, and she's an extremely properly raised girl at this age of like 12 or 13. And that's just kind of like, and then the thing too is weird, she plays this nice little piece, and it's kind of somber in tone, and they're just kind of all sitting around and looking somber about everybody, and you're like, yeah, okay, one of their own passed away, whatever. But then Leland comes down and he starts singing that same song from earlier, Get Happy or whatever, with Gersten playing it, yeah, or whatever. But they just go at it.
Singing Get Happy, and when he does start singing Get Happy and gets the girl to play, he keeps speeding up as he's going. And for a moment there, it's like, oh, he's just really into it, and then he's speeding up and up and up until he collapses. The doctor instantly gets up because he was a little worried about him before. He was asking about his hair and stuff. What the hell happened? And whenever he goes over, Leland quickly stirs again, and he sits up and he says, "I feel happy."
He's delirious. Just a phase.
Yeah,
I get it.
Is. But like I said, that doesn't disturb me the most out of this scene. It's the lack of acknowledgement for the two daughters that I don't know. I see, when it was just the one, it was almost more believable because she's that moody one that's never around. But then you have this, you're right, pride and joy of their life, and we've heard no mention of her at all. I don't know. It bothers me. It really does.
The other thing too about this, because we're actually getting close to the end here, as I'll say this, is that these episodes are taking the place over a course of a day. So it's been what, 8 or 9 episodes now. So it's like maybe let's say roughly a week.
Mm-hmm.
So it still is fresh in her mind. So it's plausible that new family members or other people can show up and things happen and all that too. So I kind of like that in a way, but in a way, you sometimes forget about it because, when this originally aired, like I said, it came on, I think, in the mid to late spring, like as a replacement. And then I think they showed reruns maybe over the summer. And it was such a hot thing. Everyone was talking about that when this debuted again, late summer, fall, that people were really interested in watching it. And so when you have that summer break and you get back into your routine of going to school and everything, you feel the passage of time. But when you're watching a show like this, where it's only been 7-8 days, it is kind of weird. And so this is probably the weakest thing to me, unless this turns into something else I'm not seeing right now. I would agree with you. And the other thing too about this scene that it makes me think of is this. Okay, you're right. Leland's hair changes. It's an obvious change, but he does seem very good in his role, and that he's very solemn about. He goes, I don't want it to sound bad, but a part of me feels like a weight's been lifted off my shoulders, of grief. He goes, I still feel bad. He goes, but in a way, I still feel kind of whatever. So it just sounds like he's moving through his grief stages in his own way, and he's gone from one level to another. And everybody goes through those stages in their own order and in their own amount of time. Because Sarah just sits there and she's had some visions and doesn't look like nothing's happened since the first episode. So I agree with you. The parents of Laura Palmer, the whole family thing is just kind of but the only other thing I could throw out this to kind of defend it is that Laura's a whacked girl, and there's several of them here, so it probably should be a whacked out family. Usually it's not one bad seed and the other ones are good, and we're talking as bad as Laura really is as a human being with the stuff she was involved in and the people, it would stand the reason that the family's whacked too, but I don't know. That's the only takeaway I can have, because you're right, this scene really stands out for not being where it seems like it fits. All the other scenes, whether you like the characters or not, they have their flow and things are going on, and that's it. Lest we forget, you get a quick cut scene here, though, moving forward here towards the end. Cooper's making his little voice recorder thing to Diane about sleeping. How he's been on like a 3-day thing or whatever. I mean, it's just there. But I think it's just a quick transition scene, because we get to a scene where Audrey's laying in bed and she's praying to Cooper basically about saving her and, I'll still help you and all that kind of stuff. And before I say anything, what did you think of this?
Well, she really wants out, like I said, and she's trying to, while she's saying her little prayer to Dale, she's trying to sound like, oh, I'm okay. Don't worry. I'll be fine. But at the same time, if you could get me the hell out of here, it'll be greatly appreciated. She's done. She wants out of there as fast as possible. But we know that Cooper didn't get the note. And
right.
You know how I'm pretty sure that something that happens next references that, because we get the giant waving his hand in front of Cooper's face, and Cooper doesn't stir. And so, like an angel, he appears at his side with the light shining. He basically tells Dale to take one thing at a time. A path is made by laying them down one by one, not by it's a bunch of trippy shit going on. But he says something about the third man. One person has seen him, 3 have, but not the body. But he ends with saying to Dale, you forgot something. And then he disappears. And it leaves Dale laying back, just staring at the ceiling, trying to remember what the hell he forgot. And I think it's that note that we see under his bed.
Yes.
Do you have anything to say on this scene before we get to the last one?
For me, all right, we started with the giant, we're ending with the giant. So obviously this is the giant episode. It's a long episode. It's a double one, so we're getting a lot of new factoids. So this is obviously going to be the meat and potatoes of driving the stuff forward. So, the giant seems kind of sincere. Things I tell you will not be wrong, but you can't seek all these clues at once. Path is formed by laying one stone at a time. I was really trying to focus on the numerics of it, where he says one person saw the third man, which I think that's an old Orson Welles thing too as well, the third man. Don't know if that's intentional or not. I don't think so. But we know that there's a third man. Is it Bob that gets referenced in here? I don't know, because Jacques, we had the letter J, and then there was Leo, who doesn't, but it looks like he's not the guy. So we don't know. One person who saw the third man, but only one is known to you. And when he says you forgot something, we all go, oh yeah, that's right, there's the note. And then that's, if it ended there, this whole episode, as long as it's been, I would say it was a good episode, boarded with some great scenes in it. It really feels like they haven't missed a beat at all. It doesn't seem like they're trying to do anything that's not in their realm, so to speak, Twin Peakishness. To me, I agree with you. I think that the previous scene with the Palmer family was a little odd, for lack of a better term, bizarre. It stands out, not for anything good or bad, but because the family thing just doesn't seem to fit, or it's the most convoluted out of all of them. Even though I'd say I don't like James, at least we understand him a little bit. But you're right. If they'd ended here, it'd be great. But there's one great final scene, which it sounds like you want to take a hold of. So go ahead.
We return to the hospital, and we are flashing through halls, lights flickering, stuff like that. It's quiet. Nobody's walking. And we get to this one hallway, and we slowly start traveling down. We see Ronette laying in bed, and her arms are slowly and slowly lifting up. And while that's happening, we're going a little faster down the hall. And then Ronette, like earlier, she had flashes of herself walking down the thing, or it was something to remind us. Ronette starts seeing flashes of that night. She starts...
Yeah.
You can hear her calling out, Laura, Laura. And this man, long hair, this horrible face, and he starts just flashing about with them in the scenes. And we, as Ronette is, I don't believe she actually screams in her room, but while she's screaming in her head, we see the man above her while she's laying there, just roaring into the night. And we see executive producers, Mark Frost. And that's the end. We haven't learned a lot about that night since, honestly, probably the 6th episode of last season. I mean, what Jacques says wasn't really helpful. So yeah, I guess since the 6th episode of last season, and this is the most we've seen of it. It's disturbing, man. I get chills right now just thinking about it.
Well, I think the stuff with Jacques is that, you found out early on with One-Eyed Jacks and everything going on that they were going to have to go on a journey. That, I don't know if I want to call it the hero's journey and all that, to a faraway place to meet people that they've only heard about in whispers that might be evil, that old sort of thing. But when you meet the guy and it's kind of a lumpy doughboy, you look at him and you go, well, he just looks like a schlub. You don't think of him as a pimp, as a guy that has, a bunch of drug run stuff going on, relations with technically legal of age women, but whatever. And just an overall bad guy. You look at him and go, this is the face of the devil. I mean, it's like, okay. And then he kind of dies unceremoniously and without much fanfare. And we, of course, have already met the one-armed man first. So, we're of course led to believe that Leo's involved, just whatever, but it just doesn't seem like it's the right fit. And so we're wondering, okay, who's this third man? Is it this Bob guy? And so the very first episode, season 1, where Sarah Palmer gets those visions in her head, and we see that guy, and he's got that really ferocious, like I say, animal look to him. We see it here. You're absolutely right. This scene ended with some great visuals that really upped the disturbing imagery, because we haven't seen Ronette at all, so she's like an afterthought. But we get reminded of her earlier, just to go, oh yeah, she was another one there. It's all about Laura Palmer, the goody girl that's not so goody, and we don't even know anything about Ronette other than she was involved in it too. And of course, it seems so simple and easy over 8 episodes and now 9, where you go, oh, 2 girls worked at a convenience store. They worked on the perfume counter. They got groomed, for lack of a better word, to go work at One Eye Jack's to service men. And they both died a horrible death, although technically Ronette's still around. So you're like, wow, why hasn't somebody come after Ronette? Why isn't the third man after that? There doesn't seem to be any thought about Ronette and what she's going through, but you see a couple visions flashing, with the strobe effect of, the fire walk with me, of this guy on the ground with a woman next to him, and him yelling and screaming, and you get a great shot of, even if it's only for a split second, of Laura's face screaming, and she looks like she's possessed, literally. Yeah. And I agree with you. Like I say, if they ended with a giant, it makes sense. You started with the giant, you end with a giant. You started goofy, ended goofy. It's that full circle thing. It makes sense. But to add this little bit here at the end, almost as an epilogue, was, I thought, just struck a genius. It really made the episode for me. It made me go, damn it, this episode was good. I was waiting to digest all the information and really look forward to the next episode, because you can't be dark all the time, because then nothing's dark. And so we had some goofy stuff in this episode, but overall, like I said, for me, I think it was a fantastic episode. I loved a lot of stuff to it. I love seeing how some of the characters are taking on sometimes either a different role or they're being more revealed. You're starting to understand how, again, not saying it's right or it's wrong about cheating on your spouse or your loved one, your partner, but you start to understand that there is a backstory to it. We just didn't know what it was. So while we see him in a moment in the vacuum, not knowing why they're cheating or doing something like that, or even like in Leo's case, doing something wrong, we don't know how Leo got to be where he's at. We just see him with a very young woman, who just had graduated high school, and he looks a little older, but you're like, okay, well, how the hell did he get into drugs? The only thing I would bring up is that there was definitely a little bit, I feel, of a supernatural element in here because of the giant, obviously, but then also because of these visions they have, but also even, and this might be me putting it together and it doesn't fit, with Maddy having visions, we know Sarah kind of did too. So it seems like that little illusion with the log lady that we didn't really get anything of other than episode 6, which I think was the most spiritual episode. It almost hints to that there's a lot more on this big, grander scale than just the guy who's a killer that they're looking for. And we'll see what happens with that. But yeah, again, like to your point, a lot going on. It's interesting. Just makes me want to see more. I haven't had enough yet. What are your final thoughts?
Well, it's funny that you mentioned the log lady, because the only time that we really talked about owls was when the log lady was talking about what the owls saw.
Yes.
And so if the owls are not what they seem, what does that mean? This episode was, you're right, it was very engaging. The one scene was weak, but they can't all be golden. It was entertaining. I think this is the most humorous and yet the darkest episode thus far of the entire series. It's hard to imagine that it can have both in one, but here we are. I'm glad we've decided to continue, and I'm decided picked up right where it left off. And I just look forward to keep going.
Yeah, and that's one of the interesting things too. Is again, for those listening here at the very end, there's a very dedicated Twin Peaks group of people out there in the Twitterverse and even on YouTube that really digest a lot of clues. And we don't really actually have gone out and listened to any of those podcasts or those streams. We're not reading any fan stories with it, or just basically watching it fresh. In your case, totally brand new to me. I haven't seen this in the 30 years since it's been on, so it's definitely been eye-opening to me. And I think the Showtime third season from about 2017, about 4 years ago, kind of piqued my interest from it. And then when Netflix started showing it, I thought, wow, it's really nice to see this on the great color print and everything. And I think what we'll do is we'll continue with season 2, finish this out, then we'll take a look at the Fire Walk with Me if it's appropriate at that time before we tackle the Showtime show. At least that's the initial idea, because normally we've just been doing here on Xtreme TV season 1, seeing what kind of reaction we get from our fans and the new subscribers that come on board. And so we've just been experimenting with a few things, because we're primarily a movie-based channel, but the fact that Twin Peaks is so iconic, it's to me one of the best TV shows of all time. I'm not here to convince you of that, Pixel. I'm here to just simply suggest that it's interesting to see somebody much younger than I am that's never seen it or really heard about it or knew anything about it watch it. So hopefully we'll get to argue and fight a little bit more about it later on, because based off this episode, there's going to be a lot changing and getting different. But for everybody listening, I'd like to say thanks a lot. Let us know if you got any comments below or anything in particular that you may have noticed about this episode that you'd like us to take a look at if we got something wrong, or you have a fan theory. Tweet at me, tweet at Pixel, tweet at anybody. Just let me know what's going on so we can add to it for next week. For Pixel, myself, your host Rob here at the Xtreme Movie Show, I'd like to say thanks for listening. Have a good night. And as always, stay extreme.